spilled everywhere. Folks, I think the time has come. It is time to talk about this guy. This is the most incredibly cursed mascot I have literally ever come across. Really hitting the breaking news here on this channel. Breaking news from 1978. So let's dive into that, shall we? You know that moment when you learn about something that was a past trend and it seems literally so ridiculous that you almost can't believe it ever happened? For instance, it seems like a lot of people right now are talking about that old show from the 90s called Decorating Sense. And the reason it has gone so incredibly viral is because a lot of the DIY projects they do on this show while decorating people's houses are so incredibly laughably bad that it doesn't seem real. That idea of having something that's so bad that it feels like it's satire is kind of what I'm talking about today, except somehow it's worse. That's right, folks. Today we are talking about what I believe to be the most dangerous and evil mascot in American history, the Dutch Boy. So why exactly does this rosy-cheeked little kid who looks like if the Berries and Cream lad was a little more eugenics themed make me so incredibly angry? Well, let's talk about it. The Dutch Boy Paint Company was founded in 1907 as an offshoot of, that's right kids, the National Lead Company. Given all this information, you may have artfully discerned that, yeah, they sold lead paint. But the thing is that during the 1900s, when they were the most popular, the actual selling of lead paint itself was not that unique. A lot of different paint companies were doing that. Although Dutch Boy was one of the highest sellers of lead paints, they weren't the only ones. No. What made Dutch Boy paints truly unique was the abundance of interesting ways that they chose to market those lead paints. Just a couple of years after Dutch Boy was founded, some countries like France, Belgium, and Austria were already banning white lead in interior house paint. And it was looking like other countries, perhaps even the US of A, would be joining them in that lead-free party. After all, multiple studies by this point had shown that lead had the potential to be really harmful, especially to children, which was kind of awful news for lead companies, especially in the US. Even more especially to the National Lead Company behind Dutch Boy Paint, because they used kids in a bunch of their advertisements from the very beginning to show how safe and clean and durable lead paint was. But apparently advertising was starting to fall behind the facts. You know, the facts that were being released that said, hey, lead is not that great for you, actually. So to combat the quickly falling popularity of lead paint, in 1918 the Lead Industries Association started a 35-year-long campaign called Cater to the Children, which was exactly as bad as it sounds. The idea was to try and convince the American public that lead wasn't all that bad and was actually an integral part of the American lifestyle. And they did this in a couple of different ways, but the main one was, you guessed it, advertising to kids. Woohoo! With this new campaign, the Dutch Boy was suddenly featured in school giveaways, games, books, puppets, dolls, and coloring books. The idea was that if you can influence a kid, you're influencing the new generation of consumers. Hence, advertising, very marketed to children. For instance, as part of this campaign, they handed out all of these little paint cans to teachers to distribute amongst their students, along with these little coloring books, like A Magical Trip to Paintland, or The Dutch Boy's Lead Party, a delightful little book that showed exactly how lead was integrated into every aspect of the American lifestyle. And because it's literally that bad, let me just give you a tiny taste of this pro-lead propaganda. The first one at the party was Gay Electric Light. He said, "I'm very brilliant. I always shine at night. No little of my brilliance is due to my glass head, which gives a light much brighter, because it's made with lead." And then the book basically just goes through everything from bullets to baseballs to dishes to everything else, telling the Dutch Boy how everything has lead in it and how the lead makes the quality of everything just that much better. Yikes! And then the Dutch boy showed them how all good painters spread the paint which saves the surface. Because it's made with lead, the guests were all delighted, and to the Dutch boy said, "We're proud to be related to Dutch boy pure white lead." So, yeah, super fun! Nothing like an anthropomorphic bullet to teach kids that lead is great. But like, here's the huge problem with all of the advertising that Dutch Boy was doing during this time period. When you distribute a bunch of free stuff to kids, they don't understand that it is advertising. They don't understand that there's a motive behind that. They kind of just think it's a good time. As I had said earlier, by the time they rolled out this campaign, they had literally already proven in like the late 1920s that lead paint was demonstrably really bad for people. There's a particular study that talks about this kid who chewed lead paint off the bars of their crib and then they literally died. And unfortunately, this was not an isolated incident. You may be asking yourself, if lead was really that bad, why didn't they just take it out of the paint? Well, here's the thing. I'll explain that a little more a bit later. But, and I know this is a huge shocker for some of my viewers, companies want to make money, and extremely rich people want to, stay extremely rich. So in order to do that, sometimes they tend to compromise some of their morals. And so the National Lead Company performed their own scientific studies, which conveniently found that lead was either not as harmful as we previously thought, or totally inconclusive. We don't actually know if it's ever really been harmful to anybody. How do you really know? But regardless, these studies worked. They really worked. In fact, along with what can be reasonably estimated as hundreds of thousands of homes across America, Dutch boy paints were used to paint Disney World, the Hollywood sign, and even the White House. Here's the thing about these studies. I'll be real with you for a second. I do a lot of research, not just for videos here on YouTube, but also in my personal life. And something I've come across over and over again is that just because something's in a scientific study or a story by a big news source does not mean that it's true. If that were the case, we would still be using lead paint all the time. That's why I'm super excited to be partnering with Ground News to support a cause we desperately need more of right now: information transparency. Last year, Ground News was featured at the Nobel Peace Center as an excellent way to stay informed, avoid echo chambers, and expand your worldview. Take, for instance, this article about Trump vowing to ban mail-in ballots and voting machines before the next election. Although it's been covered by both sides of the political spectrum, it looks a little different depending on which source you read it from. And being that there are over 180 sources covering it, there's no way you'd be able to read all of them in order to get all of that information. No one has time for that. But with the Ground News bias comparison tool, you can easily tell the political alignment and factuality of every piece of news you read on their app and website. And you can even toggle between different alignments to find out what information you might be missing out on. Everybody has a bias. That's why it's so important to be able to know where your information is coming from and how trustworthy it really is. So visit ground.news/brush or scan this QR code to get 40% off of Ground News' Vantage plan. Because frankly, it's a scary world out there, and you deserve to have trustworthy news. So going back to the studies though, the studies that claimed that lead wasn't really all that bad. For one, you need to be looking at where the money is coming from in these studies. Who funded this? Was it a good study? Now repeat after me. Chances are, if a study about the effects of lead on people's health is done by a company making millions of dollars selling lead to people, it's probably not super accurate. I wonder why. The other huge thing with a lot of these studies is that there wasn't really an ethical way to directly test the dangers of lead on a big sample size. It's not an ethical practice to have a study where you're like, okay, there's this group of kids. Now this group of kids, I want you to just kind of eat a bunch of paint chips. Eat a bunch of lead paint chips, kids. I'm sure nothing bad will happen. And you're fine. You just kind of stay exactly where you are. Do not eat paint chips. And yeah, we'll come back in 30 years and see how you're doing noggin-wise, shall we? Like, you can't do that! I'm saying all of this, but none of it really matters anyway, because we know for a fact that these scientific studies were absolutely freaking bogus. We know that lead significantly lowers IQ, decreases quality of life and happiness, and oftentimes causes significant or even irreversible damage to the brain and the body. How does it do that? Well, let me tell you. The thing is that when lead enters the body, it looks almost identical to calcium, to the extent that it can literally take the spot of calcium, including in very significant storages of calcium, like, you know, your bones. The problem with this is that calcium is essentially the middleman of a lot of different nervous system and hormone processes in your body. So when you don't have calcium there to help regulate and like move things along and help everything understand each other, your body kind of goes haywire. It doesn't have one of the crucial connections that allows different processes to communicate and get done. And so because of this, your body kind of starts to shut down. You become moody, angry, your IQ quite literally lowers itself. It's not a great thing. But the worst part of it is that because lead is stored by the body, and because the body assumes that lead is calcium, it just kind of throws it back in your bones, it means that despite the fact that you haven't touched or eaten anything that contained lead in the past 20 years, if you suddenly have a period of intense physical or emotional stress in your life, such as pregnancy, menopause, aging, a physically demanding job, injuries, illness, cancer, what have you, the body often draws out calcium to give you an extra boost with all of these different metabolic and enzymatic processes in your body. I probably explained that badly, but if there are any, like, I don't know, biologists or people who actually know how this works and all the nitty-gritty details, please say something in the comments, because I would love your input on this. But essentially, instead of drawing out calcium in periods of extreme stress, like it usually would, your body draws out the lead. So even though it's decades later, you can be poisoned all over again. So eventually, with the overwhelming amount of evidence of its danger, the US finally put a soft ban on lead paint in 1978, outlawing future homes from being painted with it. The ironic thing is that if somewhere like a daycare center, you know, or a kindergarten was already painted with lead paint, that was fine. They didn't require you to remove that or do anything about it until 2010. Yikes! So they put this ban into place, but they didn't really enforce a lot of that ban for like the next 32 years. One of the things that I honestly find simultaneously the most hilarious and messed up about this situation is that Dutch Boy is still around, and it's still selling paint, just under the Sherwin-Williams company now instead of the National Lead Company. But if you read through its own description of its history, it feels like it's trying to gaslight us into thinking that it was never doing anything wrong in the first place. Listen to this. Founded in 1907, Dutch Boy is an industry leader in innovative, high-quality paint products and packaging solutions. We're proud that over a century later, Dutch Boy remains one of the most recognizable brands in the home improvement industry, inspiring generations of DIYers and paint enthusiasts. Dutch Boy is a heritage brand with trust and quality at its core. In recent years, a new vitality and youthfulness and the promise of simple solutions have reshaped our vision, bringing it to life with energy and empowerment. There's definitely a lot of irony in this, like, simple solutions talk, because the old Dutch Boy paint was pretty dang simple. It was 91% lead, and the rest was just, like, miscellaneous other pigments and linseed oil. Pretty simple. Let's keep reading, shall we? About our icon. The Dutch Boy icon is a legacy of two 16th century Dutch chemists. These men created a superior paint production method called the Dutch process. Their work set the standards for quality and beauty for centuries to come, a legacy that lives on with Dutch Boy paint. What they are absolutely not saying here is what the Dutch process was. You want to know what the Dutch process is? I'm not telling you. Just kidding, I'm telling you. There are a bunch of different methods for making lead white. All of these historical methods are pretty much just the same. But what it is you take a bunch of like clay or earthenware pots and you fill them with thin strips of metallic lead. And then on the bottom you have a layer of acetic acid or like vinegar. And then these pots or containers were stacked directly on top of a bunch of horse poop and then left somewhere out of sight, out of mind to ferment for 3 months. At the end of which you could pull out all of these containers and the lead plates inside would be coated with a lovely dust of lead carbonate, aka lead white. So you have them talking about like this extremely important legacy of the Dutch process, but it is interesting that they're not mentioning that this is related to lead paint at all. It does kind of feel like they're leaving some things out of the story on purpose here. Come to think of it, they actually don't mention lead paint anywhere on their website that I can find, which I find a little silly for a company that was so lazy that it literally didn't bother to change its name from, oh hey, we're the lead paint people. It even has the history of their paint logo throughout the decades. Just absolutely no acknowledgement of what that logo stood for. Okay, listen, don't get me wrong here. I'm not trying to call for Dutch Boy's head on a stake or anything. I understand that businesses are businesses. 10 out of 10 explanation. But like, I understand that in order for a business to function, it needs to keep up a good public image and public appearance. I do think that considering the fact that Dutch Boy was previously involved in such a huge safety concern that many people call it the silent epidemic, it feels like, at the very least, you could put in some stupid corporate AI slop like, today, Dutch Boy is concerned for the safety and well-being of their clients more than ever, which is why we ensure that all of our paints are 100% lead-free. Like, we don't even get that. We don't even get like an acknowledgement that lead paint ever existed. It's not that it's just like annoying, but it feels insidious still to me. This company was indirectly responsible for the deaths of thousands of children, many of which they were directly advertising poison to. And they can't even say the word lead on their website anywhere? Seems a little ridiculous to me. But I guess the moral of today's story is to not believe everything that people tell you, especially if those people that are telling you things are a corporation that wants your business. Everyone has a bias, and especially in this current information environment with an oversaturation of information and there's just like rampant AI slop everywhere, it's super important to try and always know where your information is coming from. Speaking of dubious information, one of my next videos is going to be all about the history of propaganda and how to tell if something is propaganda, and also how to tell if something is AI. Tune into that, I guess. I don't really know how to end a video. Thank you so much for watching. Do not eat lead paint. And if you would like to join me in gaslighting people into learning about history, especially art history, you can join my Patreon. We have a lot of fun over there, and I do live streams every other week where we dive into things like antique paint sets and interesting parts of art history and the science in art history, and we talk about art history, and it's just a great time. But I hope that you enjoyed this video, and I hope that you have a wonderful day. Please don't eat paint. Oh, Dutch Boy, we really in it now. Oh my gosh, wait. You probably can't see that worth crap, but I have the same paint can as on the thing. That's super fun. I wonder when this was from. It doesn't say. Well, bye.